as we close 20 years of war and strife and pain and sacrifice, it's time to look to the future, not the past. To a future that's safer, to a future that's more secure.
تاسو مقتول شاهدانو سے افغانستان په داسې یو مقطع کې قرار لري چې ویشو کولی له شل کلنې ډېرې درنې او پیچلې مبارزې څخه وروسته خپل هیواد یو ځل بیا آزاد او مستقل کړي او د اشغال ټغر له دې هیواد څخه ټول کړي.
The Afghan war has finally ended. 20 years after the devastating attacks on New York City, which prompted a global war on terror. The conflict killed over 3,500 coalition troops. It also left tens of thousands of Afghans dead or maimed, and a country torn apart by decades of internal strife.
It's really unfair when people just talk about the American lives lost, because thousands upon thousands of Afghan lives were lost.
But the end of the war has also catapulted the Taliban to power yet again, an ultra-conservative regime once known for its brutal and repressive rule.
I can see dark Afghanistan under the Taliban era.
It's pretty obvious that they're just a group of people with guns.
Will the hardline movement that adheres to an austere version of Islam adopt more open, moderate and inclusive policies following its return to power? Or will it again turn the country into a haven for al-Qaeda and other terror groups aiming to foment jihad in the region and the rest of the world? Chaotic and terrifying scenes accompanied the return of the Taliban to power in Afghanistan. Thousands of Afghans thronged the airport in a desperate attempt to flee the country after the United States began to pull out its troops in haste. Troubling images of men clinging onto an aircraft only to fall to their deaths as the plane took off are now etched in humanity's memory. It reflected the deep-seated people's fear of the Taliban as they made their second coming.
We have heard that Taliban will come with the new approaches and they will approach new modern era's traditions, but you can see that Taliban's atrocities are grooming day by day, and they are involved in killing of innocent.
My fear is that if they go back to the same policy as they used to do 20 years back, then of course that's my fear, everybody's fear.
Will the world see the return of global terror following the Taliban's swift return to power? It all began after the terror attacks on US soil on September 11, 2001, which killed almost 3,000 Americans. The United States asked the Taliban to hand over the terror masterminds, including Osama bin Laden, hiding in Afghanistan. The Taliban refused. The US and allied forces then invaded Afghanistan, throwing the Taliban out of power. The Islamist movement was severely weakened, but it never left the region. It regrouped and regained its influence in Afghanistan. 20 years later, with over 170,000 people dead and tens of thousands maimed for life, the Taliban is back in Kabul. Observers believe one reason for the US defeat is its changing objectives and priorities during its 20-year occupation of Afghanistan.
Initially, the United States and NATO went in with just one objective, which was to punish the Taliban for having harbored al-Qaeda and the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks. But shortly thereafter, there was the thought that, yes, maybe we can rebuild Afghanistan. That is to say, take it away from the direction that it's been going in, that direction which made possible the rise of the Taliban and its being in a primitive state of mind, and modernize it. So for the next 20 years, the complete emphasis was upon modernization.
They went in there initially to get hold of Osama. On the excuse of extending the mission to get Osama, they then decide to do nation building. And after they got Osama, they decide to continue with nation building and thinking you can turn a pre-industrial, feudal, pastoral, sedentarist society into, this equal rights, industrialized heaven in 10, 12 years, which wasn't going to happen.
The United States had tried to plant the seeds of liberal values and democracy in Afghanistan. But these values failed to take root in the highly conservative society. Nor did the democratic processes. Still, many young Afghans had seen the merits of the new system and enjoyed their freedoms. But many Afghans who believe in liberal values have found themselves vulnerable to possible Taliban reprisals. One such person is Amina Sadat. The Afghan resident believes the Taliban will kill her if they find her. She's now hiding with her friends, worried that the nightmare has begun all over again for her compatriots. Fear engulfs her since she has grown up hearing stories of Taliban atrocities all her life when they ruled the country from 1996 until 2001.
Every Afghan has suffered from the rule of Taliban. I have heard from my father that they were beating women, they have even beaten our teachers, and I have heard from my teachers that they were saying whenever we were going to schools, we have been beaten since till we reach the school. So this is not only my family, but my friends, my teachers, my close relatives has been suffered. A little boy from my family was intoxicated and he was persuaded to do suicide bomb attack. So this is my personal suffering, and lots of my relatives has been killed in Taliban bombardment.
Amina and her family are worried about the austere and rigid version of Islam that the Taliban swears by. She believes such an interpretation is not acceptable in modern times.
Everyone knows the rule was barbaric. They say that it's Sharia law, but according to the modern Muslim society, according to modern Muslim, this is not Sharia law. They do not consider as even Muslim. They say that whoever works for or whoever is happy with the rule of America or rule of government, they are agnostic and they are apostate. So we are the right to kill them, and we will go to Jannah after killing them.
It's not just Amina who's worried about the change of guard in Kabul. Afghan leaders who tried to rebuild the country are equally apprehensive. One of them is Ahmad Wali Massoud. His late brother was a well-known resistance fighter, Ahmad Shah Massoud, in Panjshir Valley. Wali Massoud, a former ambassador to Britain, says one reason for the panic among people is that former President Ashraf Ghani fled Kabul, leaving the country in a mess.
Ashraf Ghani left the people, and he left them in a sort of very chaotic situation, irresponsible, escaping and fleeing the whole country. He did not organize some sort of thing to kind of assure people that, look, okay, I've been defeated, but I can really deliver that one to the Taliban or to anybody else. He did not do. So therefore, people kind of were completely left in a sort of panic way. They had uncertainty, ambiguity, so they didn't know what to do. There's no president, there's no security, there's no minister, everybody's gone. At the same time, Taliban has come. So they have been squeezed. That's why everybody runs for his own life.
The speed of the Taliban takeover of the country, including Kabul, took many by surprise. As the foreign troops packed their bags, the Taliban swept through vast swaths of the country, seizing control of one province after another. Finally, they rode into Kabul on August 15 as the Afghan government collapsed and its troops fled the scene.
Even the Taliban was surprised at the swiftness with which they got to Kabul. But it was quite clear before then that things were moving faster than anybody had expected. I think about a week before they actually got to Kabul, on the eve of the extended Troika talks in Doha, on the 10th or 11th of August, I think it was, it was clear that they would march on and there would be no resistance. And that's exactly what happened. I think when they got to Kabul, they weren't sure what to do next. And that's why they waited. They weren't sure. So I think everybody was caught off guard by what happened.
The rapid military advances of the Taliban precisely meant that the appetite for war among various stakeholders had diminished. There were some skirmishes in a few places, but largely most of the advances were facilitated by a will among the governors as well as the military commanders not to fight and try to sort out issues through negotiations. And that's why in most of the places, even in Takhar, northern areas, there was little fighting and most of the places fell to Taliban as a result of compromises, surrender. So it was mutual accommodation and a disinclination to continue shedding blood of Afghans.
After coming to power, the Taliban has so far tried to project a moderate face. It has promised to allow girls to study in schools and to allow women to work. All freedoms, however, will be allowed under the Sharia law. But how will the Taliban's new reign pan out? Will they really walk the talk? Located in central Islamabad is Lal Masjid, or the Red Mosque, one of the oldest mosques in the Pakistani capital. The mosque is a favorite haunt of the devout, looking for a quiet corner to pray. Though it's a sacred place, policemen guard it round the clock, and it's ringed by razor wires and barricades. Security forces keep a close watch on the mosque since hardline clerics control the affairs inside. 14 years ago, scores of people, including students, were killed in an army operation to flush out extremists from the mosque. The standoff stretched over days, with the army bringing in heavy firepower to subdue the militants inside the building. But the mosque's chief cleric, Abdul Aziz, is still as firm in his hardline beliefs as he was in 2007 when the military operation took place. He believes the system of governance in Pakistan must be changed.
ये निज़ाम हमारी राय में करप्ट निज़ाम है, चाहे वो अदालती निज़ाम हो और चाहे जमहूरी निज़ाम हो और चाहे थानों का निज़ाम हो, ये सारा निज़ाम करप्ट निज़ाम है। आपके पास अगर ताकत है, क़ुव्वत है, पैसा है, आप जाके किसी गरीब पर जो चाहे मुकदमा दर्ज करा दें और जो चाहे उस पर डाल दें। आराम से वहाँ मुकदमा दर्ज हो जाएगा और अदालतों में केस चल पड़ेगा और वो 20, 25, 30, 40 साल तक भी चल पड़ेगा। तो ये निज़ाम, हम इस निज़ाम की तब्दीली चाहते हैं।
62-year-old Abdulaziz has under him thousands of young pupils who study in the madrasas run by him. They are taught the Quran and given instructions on the life and sayings of the Prophet. It's believed even the son of Taliban founder Mullah Omar studied here in Aziz's madrasa. Aziz proudly explains that it's the Taliban ideology that's taught to his pupils.
तालिबान का मंशूर, तालिबान का निज़ाम, तालिबान का कानून वही है जो कुरान और सुन्नत का है। अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह यही तालीम देते हैं। जहाँ तक मुझे याद है कि मुल्ला उमर हफ़िज़हुल्लाह के रहमहुल्लाह के जो बेटे हैं वो भी हमारे जामिया में आए और कुछ वक्त उन्होंने गुजारा।
Observers say the expanding influence of madrasas promoting Taliban ideology is a cause for concern. Pakistan, one of the only 3 countries that recognized the Taliban in 1996, has repeatedly denied that it has backed the Taliban movement. But it's known that many Afghans who initially joined the movement were educated in Pakistani madrasas like the ones run by Abdulaziz that teach an austere version of Sunni Islam.
The Pakistan factor is very important here. In the early days, it nurtured and helped establish the Taliban, and then it continued to nurture it by providing sanctuary to the top Taliban leadership and providing other types of support to foot soldiers, including medical facilities for medical care and all of that. I think that the environment for these fundamentalist Islamist militants has been very friendly and very accommodationist, so to speak. Unfortunately, there is a lot of support within society, not just within the madrasas, but also more broadly, a fair amount of support for the ideologies, if not the tactics of the Taliban, which clearly is a cause for concern.
In the old days, there's no doubt that many Taliban who joined the movement, many students from madrasas joined it. Many of them had been educated in border area madrasas. There's no doubt about that. People are waiting to see how this will pan out. My sense is that people in Pakistan also are waiting to see what blowback, if any, there will be. And much will depend on the sort of government they form and the ideology they espouse.
The Taliban means students in the Pashto language. They emerged in the early 1990s in southern Afghanistan following the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan.
It really owes its founding to the anti-Soviet Mujahideen fighters that have been in Afghanistan trying to expel the Soviets for many years and receive support from the Pakistanis, of course, as well as the Americans and the Saudis. But then after they succeeded in getting the Soviets out of Afghanistan, the country just descended into a horrific civil war that lasted for a number of years. And then the Taliban really stepped in and projected itself as the best solution for all of this chaos, even though that entailed, really draconian interpretations of the law and very brutal, cruel justice. And so they were able to sort of step above all of that chaos and all of that violence to install their system. And it was, of course, in place for a number of years until the end of 2001, when the U.S. forces entered and removed them.
The Taliban is a battle-hardened group, proud of the fact that it has beaten back a superpower. One reason for the endurance and resilience is that they're indoctrinated and highly motivated, not afraid to die. 42-year-old Nasrullah in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region has known no other life apart from war. He learned to use guns early in his life and has fought the US and Allied forces for years. Nasrullah says he has never been afraid to die.
बात यह है कि डर तो मौत तो हर जगह में आनी है, वो तो आपको रास्ते में भी आनी है, बेल्ट में भी आनी है, जिधर भी आनी है, दूसरी बात है अगर बेमकसद आदमी मर जाए तो इससे अच्छा है कि एक मकसद के लिए आदमी मर जाए। तो इसमें खौफ नहीं है, इसमें एक सुकून है। आखिरत में भी हमें उधर जन्नत भी मिलेगी और दुनिया में भी हमें एक अच्छा माहौल मिल जाएगा।
Ironically, a dyed-in-the-wool Taliban fighter like Nasrullah is today thinking of a new future for Afghanistan. He believes the Taliban will prove all the cynics wrong by establishing peace and stability in the country.
इंशाअल्लाह जब अफ़गानिस्तान में एक अच्छा हुकूमत या अमन आएगा और शरीयत उधर नाफिज हो जाएगी तो इंशाल्लाह वहाँ पे किसी किस्म का ऐसा कुछ नहीं होगा। क्योंकि आपको पता है ये लोग तो किसी के लिए जंग लड़ रहे थे, इनके पास तो अपना कोई नज़रिया सोच नहीं थी। डॉलरों के लिए, पैसों के लिए, इक़्तिदार के लिए या कोई और अपने मफाद के लिए लड़ रहे थे। इनके पास ना आवाम के लिए, ना पश्तून के लिए, ना फ़ारसी या और जितने लोग हैं इनके लिए कोई भी ऐसा कोई निज़ाम नहीं है। अफ़गानिस्तान में तो इंशाल्लाह जो दौर आएगा ये एक रोशन दौर होगा, एक बेहतरीन दौर होगा, एक पुरसुकून और अमन का दौर होगा।
But the new Afghanistan that Nasrullah and Abdul Aziz plan to build will still be ruled by strict Islamic codes as interpreted by the Taliban.
देखिए बात यह है कि जो लोग जराइम पेशा हों उन जराइम पेशा पर के साथ नरमी करते हैं तो उससे मसाइल बिगड़ जाते हैं। तो शरीयत मुतहरा जो लोग सख्त सज़ाएं उन लोगों के लिए जिनके जुर्म बड़े हों। एक आदमी जुर्म करता है, किसी का माल लूट के ले जाता है तो उसके लिए सख्त सज़ा होनी चाहिए। और बल्कि मैं ये कहता हूँ कि इनकी सज़ाओं से फिर भी नरम है। अब शरीयत कहती है कि चोर है उसके हाथ काट दी जाए। देखिए हमारे यहाँ बच्चियों के साथ रेप हो रहा है, अब इस्लाम ने उसके लिए बड़ी सख्त सज़ा मुकर्रर की है। अगर वो शादीशुदा है तो उसको संसार का हुक्म है, और अगर वो जो है गैर शादीशुदा है तो उसको जो है 50 कोड़े 100 कोड़े का हुक्म है। तो ये सख्त सज़ा उन लोगों के लिए है जो जराइम की इंतहा कर देते हैं।
The ideology of the Taliban, they say, is that of Islam. But if you look at the Quran says nothing about the making of a state. In fact, there's no word for state in Arabic. Taliban will make their version of the Islamic State, and yeah, they'll cut off hands and they'll hang people in public and they'll destroy statues as they did with the Bamiyan Buddhas. But does that mean that they have created an Islamic State? It's always going to be open up to debate because, I repeat, there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the Quran which says an Islamic State has to be this way.
They're extremely obscurantist and regressive, because if you actually talk to the Arabs and Arab Salafists, they would actually consider the Afghans to be extremely non-compliant. The Afghans, of course, will justify their traditional customs as being in line with Islam, but that's not how jurisprudence outside, Islamic jurisprudence outside of Afghanistan sees them.
The Taliban's past record has made many Afghans, especially women, worried. They believe the Taliban can't change since their fundamentalist ideology is the same as before. Thousands of Afghans have fled the country and thousands are trying to get out. Even those who have escaped are spending sleepless nights in the countries they have sought refuge in. Will a new era of darkness truly prevail following the return of the Taliban? Fear has driven many Afghans to seek refuge elsewhere. And that fear was evident recently outside the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Delhi. Hundreds of desperate Afghan nationals are camped out there day and night, demanding their rights as refugees. Many were hoping that countries would accept them as immigrants so that they could lead a secure life, free from violence and repression. India, for one, has seen an increase in refugee influx in the days leading to the fall of Kabul. One of them is 35-year-old Rida Sagari, who escaped from Kabul 3 months ago. Sagari is a women's rights activist and an outspoken critic of the Taliban. She's worried over the impact of the Taliban takeover on her and her family. Until today, she can vividly remember the horror days under the Taliban rule over 20 years ago.
بار تحمل کردیم. راهی برای گریز وجود نداشت، راهی برای فرار وجود نداشت. پدرم بسیار توهین میکردن، تحقیر میکردن. پدرم یک پروفسور علم فیزیک است و بود او زمان و در وزارت معارف کار میکرد. پدرم خانه نشین ساختن و مجبور شد دکانداری بکنه. برادرای من از مکتب دوره مکتب بود و اونا باید مکتب میخواندن ولی برادرای من به مدرسه سوق دادن ولی برادرای من خانه نشین شد و نخواستن مدرسه بخونن. من خودم شخصا مرا 5 سال آزگار نتونستم که مکتب بخونم. خانه نشین شدم. من مجبور شدم خیاطی بکنم، قالین بافی بکنم، سقوی بکنم به خاطر از اینکه خرچ خودم پیدا کنم و بتونم که کورسای مخفی که راه اندازی کرده بودیم و یا کورسای مخفی که ساخته بودیم، کورسای مخفی مثل کورس کامپیوتر، انگلیس و این چیزا رو اونجا بخونم. به خاطر که زمان من دختر خرد دوره مکتب بودم، یعنی 13-14 سال بیشتر نداشتم. زندگی خیلی سخت بود، تحملش سخت بود و امروز چون اون بار ما کشیدیم یک دوره و من نتونستم تحمل کنم و من از اون خاطر از افغانستان با چوچایم بیرون شدم بابت از اینکه من بعد از او بسیار زیاد علیه طالبان و علیه ملاها مبارزه کردم و در این ریسک هستن. ای که طالبا با اونا چیکار میکنن من هنوز نمیدانم.
Sagari is among the first generation of journalists to have faced a television camera in a studio in the new era of democracy ushered in by the United States. She fought for women's rights on the streets of Kabul. She received death threats from extremists linked to the Taliban, forcing her to flee her country. In recent days, the Taliban has projected a moderate face, saying it will allow women to go out, study and work. But Sagari is not convinced.
در 20 سال گذشته زنان تحصیل کردند، زنان در حوزه‌های هنر، سینما، تئاتر، رقص، موسیقی، سیاست، اقتصاد، فعالیت‌های بیشمار کردند و تازه زنده شده بودند. یعنی چرخه کشور و مقاومت در درون یک نظام مدنی، یک نظامی که آزادی بیان در او بود و رو به دموکراسی بود رشد می‌کردند و به یک شکوفایی خاصی رسیده بودند. ما کادرهای خاصی را امروز داشتیم که دیگر دل ما جمع شده بود که افغانستان بالاخره یک ریشه از زنان آگاه و یک ریشه از زنان فهمیده بعد اصول دموکراسی را پیدا کرده. ولی متاسفانه با آمدن امارت اسلامی و هم به چنین افتضاحی که به صورت یک کودتا بود، این باعث شد که این زنها به صورت یکباره متوقف شوند و به صورت یکباره فلج شوند و همه چیز از دست بدن. همه چیزه. مثل ای که کامره من سر جایش مانده و دیگه من عکاسی کردن نمیتونم. شریعت اسلامی و امارت اسلامی هم ارزش‌هایی داره که از او گذر کردن نمیتونه. چهره زنان، حضور زنان و صدای زنان چیزی است که امارت اسلامی نمیتونه او رو بپذیره و مجبور است که او رو از بین ببره. سالون‌های زیبایی چهره‌های زنان زیبا می‌سازه. در دیوارها تصاویری که بر دیوارها یا عکس‌های رسامی‌هایی که از زنان بر دیوارها هست، اینا چیزایی هستند که حتما باید توسط طالبا پنهان شود. اینا حضور زیبایی است. امارت اسلامی علیه زیبایی است. امارت اسلامی علیه از این میترسه که حضور زنان اونا رو فلرت میسازه و اینا چیزایی است که قبلا هم امارت اسلامی رو پیاده کرده و نگذاشته که زنان حضور داشته باشن. نمیتن که زنان به صفحه تلویزیون ها ظاهر شوند و مثل یک ژورنالیست باشن و صفحات تلویزیون ها تمام زنان رو جمع کردن. در تلویزیون ملی زن اجازه داده نشده که بیایه. سالن زیبایی آرایش زن حرام است، موسیقی حرام است.
It's not just Sagari who has sought refuge in the Indian capital. Scores of young students from different provinces of Afghanistan are also facing an uncertain future. They are studying courses ranging from computer science to economics at India's prestigious Delhi University. This year, the university has admitted 400 Afghan students, of whom 90 are already in Delhi. 21-year-old Ihsanullah Karim is a final-year economics honors student. He's worried about the developments in his country and what will happen next following the Taliban takeover.
All of the students from Afghanistan that I'm in contact with were either in Afghanistan, in India or any other country. All of them share the same worries. There's complete uncertainty in Afghanistan. We don't know what will happen next. Students, they are told to stay home. Schools are not functioning. Colleges are shut. American University, one of the best universities in Afghanistan, which many of my friends attended, it's completely closed. So it's very bad.
Ihsanullah's family had suffered in the hands of the Taliban. Like his friends, he has heard many horror stories of the past Taliban rule.
What happened was that they held a football match in the Ghazi Stadium of Kabul. So everyone was excited that, okay, after so long a football match is happening. Everyone wanted to attend the match. And when they got there, Taliban started executing people instead of the football match. So it was just to scare people and let them know that we will kill you anytime, anyhow we like. So how shocking is that when you're expecting a football match and go see a woman being executed?
They do have very good reasons to be worried because the Taliban as yet is an unknown commodity. It's an unpredictable commodity. We don't know how they're going to behave. If they behave like they did last time, you remember they walked into a diplomatic compound where they had no business being, dragged out the former president Najibullah, tortured him, chopped off his genitals and then hanged him while he was still alive and bleeding from a lamppost. So that's kind of the dangerous Taliban.
But the Taliban now insist that they are a far different group compared to the regime that ruled Afghanistan from 1996 until it was removed from power by the US-led military forces back in October 2001.
जब वो वापस अपने पूरे निज़ाम में आएंगे तो सबसे पहले इंशाल्लाह हम वहाँ अमन कायम करेंगे और जितने ये हमारे ख़िलाफ़ प्रोपेगंडे हैं इसके लोगों को पता चल जाएगा कि वहाँ पे हम कैसे वक्त गुजारते हैं. आपने देखा होगा कि वहाँ पे अभी भी औरतों के स्कूल खुले हैं, मदरसे खुले हैं, उसके अलावा जितने अस्पताल हैं जिसमें वो पहले ड्यूटियाँ देते हैं सब लोग अपना काम कर रहे हैं. तो इंशाल्लाह हम जब वापस आएंगे तो दुनिया को दिखाएंगे कि ये वो कौम थी जिसको लोग कहते थे कि ये अफगानिस्तान को पत्थर के दौर में लेके जाएंगे.
इस्लामी इमारत मुताहिदा से د ښځو حقوقو ته د شریعت په چوکاټ کې پابند اوسیږي. زموږ د خواندو مندو هغه حقوق چې الله جل جلاله په شریعت کې ورکړي دي او زموږ د ملت ارزښتونه ایجابوي هغه ټول ورکړو. ښځه د ټولنې مهم عنصر او برخه ده.
This is not the Afghanistan of 2000. This is a different Afghanistan that they've come to, especially the urban centers. The only area in which they will not backtrack will be on some of their Islamist cultural offerings or requirements, especially related to women and to the media and so on. But that may not happen overnight. They do realize that a lot has changed. At best, maybe they will now ask the women to wear hijabs. But I don't think they will discourage the employment of women under certain circumstances in certain sectors.
Relative to what the Taliban were earlier, there is certainly not going to be a return to those extreme primitive values where you bottle up women in the home, you don't let them go out to the bazaars unless they're accompanied by a male. Well, that may not happen, but there's no concept of women's equality. There's only the statement that women will get their rights according to Islam. But what does it mean to get their rights according to Islam? It means something very different for Muslim women in Britain or in the United States who would be certainly restricted by their husbands or their fathers or whatever. While I do see some loosening up for women, I don't see a whole lot. Maybe they will allow female announcers, all strapped up with just the face and showing, but no more.
The war and fears over Taliban rule have already turned millions of Afghans into refugees in other nations. According to the UN Refugee Agency, there are around 2.5 million refugees from Afghanistan globally, most of whom are in Pakistan and Iran. Now the UN has warned of a humanitarian emergency of 500,000 internally displaced people. In the last few weeks, the US and coalition forces have evacuated at least 120,000 civilians, mostly refugees from Afghanistan. Still, the dark clouds of the rise of militant Islam and terrorism loom on the horizon. Will the terror outfits, such as the Islamic State Khorasan and al-Qaeda, feel emboldened, spreading their tentacles outside the newly liberated country?
Yeah, you will pay the ultimate price.
غواړو نړیوالو ته د امریکا د متحده ایالاتو په شمول ډاډ او اطمینان ورکړو چې د افغانستان له خاورې نه به هیڅ چاته زیان او ضرر متوجه نه وي. همداسې د سیمې هیوادونو ته همدارنګه خپل همسایه هیوادونو ټولو ته ډاډ ورکوو چې موږ اجازه نه ورکوو چې د افغانستان خاوره د ګاونډیو او یا د نورو ملکونو په ضد استعمال سي او یا د هغو په خلاف استعمال سي.
Within days of the Taliban making promises of dealing with terror groups, a bomb went off in the Afghan capital, killing around 170 people, including 13 US soldiers. The Islamic State Khorasan, or ISIS-K, a sworn enemy of both the Taliban and the United States, claimed responsibility for the bombing. The suicide attack calls into question the Taliban's ability to deal with all terror groups operating in the country. Even if the Taliban curbs the influence of the Islamic State, observers are concerned over its deep links with al-Qaeda and other terror networks.
I don't think that we can expect the Taliban to go after terrorists other than ISIS-K, which is a rival, and a few other small groups that it doesn't gain any benefit from having a relationship with. With the Taliban in control, inherently, that means that you're going to have terror groups in a better position to consolidate themselves. They know that they're not going to be targeted by the Taliban, ISIS being the exception. And again, if the Taliban struggles to consolidate its power and gain legitimacy, you're going to have increased chances of violent resistance, more violence, more chaos. That's the type of environment where terror groups of any type are able to thrive and exploit and use that to their advantage to strengthen themselves and to carry out attacks in Afghanistan and perhaps in due course beyond Afghanistan's borders as well.
The situation may deteriorate further if an open conflict were to erupt between rival factions within the Taliban, namely the the Taliban Leadership Council, known as the Quetta Shura, and the militant commanders, the Haqqani Network.
If these two can't come to a compromise and there is intra-Taliban conflict, that kind of a vacuum will see al-Qaeda come about. But remember, in Taliban's own agreement, which Mullah Baradar has signed with the Americans, it is very clear that Afghanistan cannot be used for terrorism against any of America, against America or any of its allies or friends. This is very clear.
The terms of the agreement may be clear, but the new hardline Taliban government in Kabul has instilled little confidence in other countries' capitals so far. The Taliban has packed its cabinet with militants, many of whom are on a UN panel sanctions list. The terror groups operating in Afghanistan consider the US retreat a catastrophic defeat for Western democracy and a great leap towards the dream of a unified caliphate. They consider the rise of militant political Islam and the establishment of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan as a step towards that dream. Some observers believe that the immediate fallout may impact Pakistan, where the Pakistani Taliban seeks to overthrow the government in Islamabad.
Already one can see that there's mass jubilation in Pakistan. We see that Lal Masjid, which was really where the recruitment for the Mujahideen used to take place back in the 80s, they have been flying the Taliban flag. And they are extremely happy, and they say that, yes, this country is ready for a revolution. It's not, in my opinion, ready for a revolution, but it's close to that, particularly with Imran Khan's government in power, because it is seeking to do what Ziaul Haq wanted to do and pushing it to the very next stage. So yes, although we have both the Afghan Taliban and Imran Khan saying that they are for a more moderate position, yet at its core, that position is unchanged and it represents the growth of extreme Islam.
There's no doubt that there are religious forces in Pakistan who are delighted at the Taliban victory and are obviously hoping that to draw some inspiration from it. Let's not kid ourselves that that's not the case. Having said that, there are a lot of other people in Pakistan who are delighted at the Taliban victory. But their delight is not so much as the Taliban victory as it is at the departure of the United States. There's a lot of anti-Americanism in this region. And I think the delight is that a superpower like America, an imperialist power like America, has been defeated. So I think religious forces in this country may feel a little emboldened. But by the same criterion, I think the security forces of our country are acutely aware that this could be a problem. And I think they will work overtime to ensure that nothing like this erupts in Pakistan.
There's concern in Delhi as well over the course the new Afghan government will follow in the future. India is already coping with a flood of Afghan refugees, and now it's worried over how far the extremists will stir up trouble in Kashmir.
The danger for India, though, is there is that 1 or 2% there who are actual, genuine globalist jihadists like al-Qaeda, who could be transferred to the Kashmir jihad and things like that. But other than that, right now, it seems to me that the average Taliban is much more interested in redoing the Durand Line, and the headache for Pakistan is much greater. So in terms of sequencing the threats, I would say threat of civil war between Haqqani and Quetta Shura is number one. Second, some kind of a huge Pashtun insurgency within Pakistan to fix the Durand Line again is number two. And number three is the danger for India, which is Kashmir. And number four would be sort of international jihad and the ability to pull off another 9/11, sequentially in reducing order. India has very good reasons both to be worried, but also to be involved.
Afghanistan has been a country in a state of permanent war. A vast, mountainous and rugged nation that's faced violence and turmoil over decades. constrained by its religious strictures, culture, and fractured past. It conveys the image of a nation stuck in medieval times, convulsing in chaos, infighting, and foreign occupation. With the Americans gone and the Taliban in control, will it finally shake off its history and emerge as a modern nation? Or will its future look more like its past, until another cataclysmic upheaval sends it spinning on an unknown trajectory for years to come?
No, I don't think it'll look like its past. I think they're going to make a heroic effort to make it look something that is workable. Otherwise, the thing is, if it slips into chaos, which is entirely possible, then they won't be able to stop it. It'll go back into fragmentation and division. And then maybe the big powers might try and take advantage of that and create more difficulties for them.
It won't look exactly like the past, it will be a variation on the past. You will see a lot of continuity, you will see a lot of horror stories of human rights violations and things like that come out, because that is the nature of Afghanistan. That is the way Afghanistan is.
If you look at it right now, everyone in the world is giving us a cold shoulder. We are losing all of our achievements, and absolutely, what drives them, their ideology, it will inevitably take us back. And that is the biggest cause of pain, especially in the youth, that we have lost all the achievements that we had for past 20 years.
They are going to ruin our society, the state building process which America has done since 2001 to the present day. I can see dark Afghanistan under the Taliban era. I say that I urge the international community to bring Taliban on table, and I urge them to resolve our issue, to stop killing of our innocent brothers and sisters in Afghanistan.